Hi, everyone. Welcome to FAIR's free monthly webinar series. My name is Carrie Mokowski. I'm the National Program Senior Manager here at FAIR, and I'm going to be your moderator for today's presentation, AlphaGal Syndrome from Diagnosis to Ingredient Detective. Before we get started, I just wanted to note a few things really quickly. This presentation will be recorded and posted on the FAIR website in about 1 to 2 weeks. And you can easily access it there. It's foodallergy.org/webinars. Additionally, please note that for maintaining a quality recording, all attendees will be muted throughout the webinar. However, if you are having any technical difficulties, you can use the chat feature in the GoToWebinar toolbar that you see on the right-hand side of your screen. And also, and very importantly, you can use the question feature to ask questions during the presentation. So if time permits at the end of the webinar, we're going to have our presenters respond to some moderated questions. And then lastly, for those of you on Twitter, we encourage you to join us in conversation throughout the broadcast. You can actually follow along with us at our handle @foodallergy and use the hashtag FAIRWebinar. So today we have 3 experts in this field, but without further ado, I am going to go ahead and pass the webinar off to one of our presenters, Dr. Jennifer Platt, and she is going to get us started with some good introductions of everybody that's on the call today. So go ahead, Jennifer, take it away.
Great. Thank you, Carrie. Beth Carrison and I co-founded Tick-borne Conditions United, which I will refer to as TBCU for short, almost 2 years ago. I have my doctorate in public health from the University of North Carolina, and Beth is an integrative nutrition health consultant. Between the two of us, we have several tick-borne conditions and extensive experience. There's not a lot of information about the so-called lesser-known conditions, and that's what's led us to start TBCU. AlphaGal syndrome is a prime example, and so we are very grateful to FAIR to have this opportunity today. I actually live in the southern United States, where we have underreporting most likely of rickettsial diseases and ehrlichiosis, and those are some of the other lesser known conditions that we are working on. So at TBCU, education is the core of everything that we strive to do through trainings and webinars such as this. We're really excited that right before the webinar, Carrie told us that there were about 600 people that registered for today's webinar, and 80% indicated that they have a red meat allergy. So, for us, education is not only about educating patients and their families, but especially educating healthcare providers so they can provide the much needed support to their patients that is so critical to navigating what can be sometimes very murky waters of AlphaGal syndrome. So just to those of you who are on the call or on the webinar that are healthcare providers, I'd like to say a special thank you to you for taking the time to be on here. So when people hear about a red meat allergy, one of the first things out of their mouth a lot is, oh my gosh, I could never live without eating red meat. How do you do it? That in the end is probably the biggest certainty of dealing with AlphaGal syndrome. However, there's an unpredictability to navigating daily life in the world of having this allergy. And Beth and Dr. Merritt are going to help talk about that today. To that end, we also focus at TBC United on research. So we are, a prime example of that is that we are in the final stages of doing a pilot survey on patient symptoms, AlphaGal syndrome patient symptoms, and food preferences. So later in the webinar, we'll put up a website, but if you're interested in participating in future surveys along with us, we would be very grateful for any input. So research is our second area of importance. And then our final area is advocacy. A current example of that is Beth, who is the patient representative to the AlphaGal syndrome subcommittee of the tick-borne disease working group, which is a federal level working group that is working at the direction of Congress and puts out a biannual report. So we're really excited because the AlphaGal subcommittee, along with all the other subcommittees, are feverishly working to finish up their reports to the working group, and those will be presented at the end of January. So you can stay tuned for that information, both online and attend the working group meetings online as well. So without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Dr. Merritt. I want to introduce her really quickly. Dr. Merritt has probably the most significant experience of us in terms of dealing with AlphaGal because she has had it herself since 1979. And so she got it when she was a young girl and then went along to attend medical school in the early 90s and has become an allergist and immunologist in Northwest Arkansas. So Dr. Merritt was instrumental in discovering AlphaGal in the United States, and during her fellowship with Dr. Thomas Platt Mills at the University of Virginia, she and he helped work together to develop the very first AlphaGal test. So a lot of times that you might hear Dr. Scott Commons is another researcher in the field, and one of his favorite sayings is AlphaGal breaks all the rules. There are many conventions known to allergy science, but AlphaGal doesn't really match them. And Dr. Merritt is going to spend some time talking with us today about and give us an overview of the syndrome, as well as diagnosis, treatment, and support. And then we're going to have Beth talk about being an ingredient detective and social and emotional support. So we'll spend about the next 30 to 35 minutes going through those first 4 bullet points that you see. And then we'll have 15 to 20 minutes at the end for questions and answers. And apparently we've already had a lot of really good questions and answers come in. So I'm sure we'll fill up the full amount of our time. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Dr. Merritt. Thank you so much for being with us today. I might also add she is our board chair.
Thank you very much. And I'm in Bentonville, Arkansas right now, but I did do training in Charlottesville, Virginia with Dr. Platt Mills. And in 2004, there was a cancer drug that was made by a company called M-Clone. And there was a physician at the University of Virginia in the oncology department who asked Dr. Platt Mills to help develop a test because there were people having life-threatening allergic reactions to the cancer drug. And so we started the test back then, and then it kind of fell to the wayside. There were some problems with FDA approval, and so the test, didn't go any further after 4 patients came back positive for an allergy to the cancer drug. And then in 2006, whenever I was in Bentonville, Arkansas in private practice, one of my nurses, her husband works at an oncology clinic, and he said a patient died from a cancer drug reaction. And I said, oh my gosh, was it cetuximab? And it turned out it was. So I called Dr. Platt Mills and I said, hey, we need to develop this test again. And at the time, we didn't know it was AlphaGal related. So that's why this is kind of breaking the rules. Is it was a very unusual presentation for an allergic reaction on the first dose of a medicine. And I requested Dr. Platt Mills develop the test, and so we did. And with Vanderbilt, their oncology department, and with North Carolina, Dr. Platt Mills figured out the reactions were mostly in the Mid-South, and he figured out it was related to the distribution of the Lone Star tick. He also was positive for AlphaGal on the cancer test because he had been bitten by ticks, but he didn't know at the time about the association. And so we knew he was positive for AlphaGal, which was found to be the carbohydrate. So it's a carbohydrate from mammals, except humans. And on this cancer drug, it was grown in an animal cell line that put the carbohydrate on there. So when Dr. Platt Mills was bitten by a bunch of baby seed ticks, he repeated the AlphaGal test and it went up significantly. And he figured out the association with the tick bites. Next slide, please. And the allergy is to more than just pork and beef and mammal. It can be medicines, it can be products that we use on our skin. It's in a lot of things that we wouldn't think about necessarily. But the main thing is to avoid eating red meat, which is beef, pork, lamb, venison. It involves a lot of foods that we like to eat. And so it's very difficult. Also, some people develop a milk allergy as well. The other difficult thing about this allergy is it's sometimes hard to pinpoint what's causing the reactions because the reactions can be delayed up to 10 hours after eating the food. So one of my first patients had eaten a hamburger at 6 o'clock and woke up at midnight with a severe allergic reaction, had to call an ambulance, had to get epinephrine, and it took a while to figure out that it was a delayed reaction to the hamburger she had eaten. And these reactions were reported in Australia about 30 years before we did by Dr. Van Noonen, and she also found the association with ticks, but the tick in Australia is called the paralysis tick, so it's a different species. And she described it in the literature, but we didn't realize that until we started doing the research as well. And there's a newer research about the tick saliva. Originally, people thought the ticks must have bitten a different mammal and then bit the human, but it appears that the tick saliva actually contains AlphaGal. And I'm presenting a study here where Dr. Cummins and some researchers in Mississippi did tick saliva studies and found that 2 species actually contained AlphaGal in the saliva. One of them was the Lone Star tick, which is also called Amblyomma americanum. That's a very common tick in the Mid-South, but it's also spreading. And then the other tick is the black-legged tick, which is Ixodes scapularis. It's also sometimes known as a deer tick, and that also produced the AlphaGal in the saliva. And they had these ticks feeding on human blood, which does not contain AlphaGal, and that's how they figured out these ticks actually produced AlphaGal in their saliva. So if you can go to the next slide. This is talking about other co-infections and other conditions we have to think about with tick bites. I know this isn't necessarily allergy related, but if patients are presenting with other symptoms of fever and joint pain, rashes, they also need to possibly get checked for tick infections. Next slide. And this is talking about the reactions being delayed. Some people get hives and rashes, and that's called urticaria, and that's usually delayed. So that could be the waking up at midnight. They also get gastrointestinal distress, and it's more than just distress. It's usually a severe abdominal pain. It's different than what I call a routine abdominal pain. Some people are doubled over in pain. Some people have vomiting, and then some people have diarrhea. And some people have immediate symptoms, but like I said, they could be delayed, so it's hard to associate which food it was with. Some people get a drop in their blood pressure, and that's a sign of anaphylaxis. So anaphylaxis, we'll go a little bit more in detail on the next slide, but it usually involves a drop in blood pressure or breathing problems. And so this mentions that one of the possible symptoms with AlphaGal is anaphylaxis. So that's a life-threatening condition and needs to be treated with epinephrine. And on the left side of my slide is different brands of epinephrine. I wasn't going to go into the labeling, but there are different brands available. There are some generics available. And if a patient can't afford the medicine, there are different programs available to help them get that type of medicine. Next slide. And this is talking about the symptoms. This is from the FAIR website. And I've always liked the FAIR website for the food allergy action plan for school for kids that have food allergies. But I also give the action plan to adults because it helps them know what symptoms they need to, be significantly aware of. If they have lung symptoms, that's shortness of breath, wheezing. Some people get a repetitive cough. Heart symptoms, they can get pale, blue, faint, weak pulse, or dizzy. So if it's a small child that has this, usually they're going to look dizzy or pass out. They may not be able to tell you that they're feeling dizzy. The throat symptoms can be a tight throat, hoarseness, trouble breathing, and trouble swallowing. The significant mouth symptoms include the tongue or the lips swelling. So if a patient comes in with a muffled voice, that's usually a sign that their mouth or throat is getting involved. Skin symptoms include hives all over the body, widespread redness. It's more than just a few hives. It's usually all over, severe itching, severe redness. And then some people get repetitive vomiting and severe diarrhea. And then some people also get a sense of impending doom, like something bad is about to happen. So usually anxiety is associated with anaphylaxis, which makes it difficult in the emergency room. Sometimes they think that patients are just having a panic attack. But if they do have the sense of impending doom along with the other symptoms, they need to get treated for anaphylaxis. And the milder symptoms include a runny nose, sneezing, itching, some mouth itching, a few hives or mild itching, and mild nausea or discomfort. But if someone has two systems getting involved, like if they throw up and they're having hives, I usually recommend giving epinephrine because that's a sign that it's a systemic reaction. So they need an epinephrine injection immediately and call 911. I think people need to get transported by ambulance. They don't need to be driving themselves, or if a mom is worried about their child, I don't think they need to be driving the child to the emergency room. I recommend calling an ambulance if it's anaphylaxis. Next slide. And the testing for AlphaGal, the commercial laboratory that mainly does the test in the United States is Viracor Eurofins. And there's different test codes depending on who your referring laboratory is. So I just gave an example of one. So Quest Diagnostics test code for the AlphaGal test is 95241. If you were going to send it directly to the lab, you'd have to have a contract, but the code at Viracor is 30039. Some laboratories may need that information if they're having a hard time locating the test, but it is generally available at most laboratories. So Quest, LabCorp, Mayo, RML, most of these labs can do this test, and it mostly goes to Viracor. There's also another company called Thermo Fisher that has the assay as well. And it's generally a good idea, I think, to check a milk IgE if you're suspecting an allergy to AlphaGal. And then I usually check beef and pork IgE. That's the protein, beef and pork. And a lot of times patients are allergic to both. So if the galactose alpha-1,3 galactose test isn't available, I recommend checking the beef and pork IgE. But in my experience, the AlphaGal is usually higher, and that's the carbohydrate. And then in my experience, half of the people allergic to AlphaGal are allergic to milk, and that's why I usually check the milk allergy as well. And then some insurances cover with a specific diagnosis. In particular, Medicare doesn't cover food allergy testing with the food allergy diagnosis, but they usually cover it with allergic urticaria as the diagnosis. And then a positive result is anything above 0.10. So this doesn't follow the usual scale for allergies. For like a milk allergy, we have a scale of 0 to 6, 6 being the most allergic, 6 being associated with anaphylaxis. This allergy doesn't follow that. So I've had patients with a 0.3 positive who have anaphylaxis. And on the reverse side, I've had people with a 50 not having reactions and eating beef and pork. So it's a very difficult allergy to assess laboratory-wise, but anything that's above a 0.1 is positive. Next slide. And this is self-reported AlphaGal syndrome in the United States. So there's a map called Where in the World is AlphaGal, and it's called a Z map. And this is people putting their pin where they're located. And as you see across the Mid-South, that's where it's the thickest. And that's where we originally saw that most of the AlphaGal cases were happening, but it's obviously spreading. When we first started doing the research, no one in Florida was seeing this, and now there's quite a few in Florida. Two of the patients in California are actually patients of mine that moved from Missouri. So there's not as much on the western coast of the United States. And then it's moving further north. It's getting into Canada, Minnesota. There's more northern states seeing this allergy as well. Next slide. And I was going to go over the medications. It's very difficult to treat a patient with AlphaGal with medications because a lot of them have additives that are from mammal products. So some of them are pretty obvious. Gelatin capsules. Gelatin is usually mammal unless it's stated that it's from a plant source. But also patients can get a pill and think it's safe, but it has pre-gelatinized starch in it. So if they're sensitive to gelatin, they need to be aware that the pills can contain pre-gelatinized starch. Vaccines, a lot of vaccines have mammal products, and I was going to let Beth get more into that one. Certain things like pancreatic enzymes could be from a mammal source, and so I wrote down the name of one that is safe. Medications can have magnesium stearate, or it can also be called stearic acid, and that can make it, where it's a binder, but you may not realize that that's from a mammal because they don't currently declare what has mammal in it. And then some medicines are generally mammal-derived, so like heparin. So that makes it difficult in the cardiovascular field if someone is needing a blood thinner. They are trying, I think, to develop a mammal-free heparin or blood thinner right now. I did see some 2019 articles regarding this. Some of the statins for cholesterol contain mammal products. Omeprazole, if it's in the gelatin capsule, has mammal products. Synthroid, there are certain brands that don't, and that's why it's important to get the pharmacies involved and to have the pharmacist possibly contact the companies to see if they have mammal products. And also lactose. So if someone's allergic to milk, they may have a problem with the lactose in the tablet. And so some of the antihistamines contain lactose. In particular, like the Zyrtec that I recommend can have lactose in it. The Benadryl can have mammal products in it. So I usually recommend taking a Benadryl product that doesn't contain mammal. One of them is called a Unisom Sleep Melt, but it's diphenhydramine that doesn't have mammal. Another one is a liquid called ZQuil liquid, and that one generally doesn't have mammal. But it's important to check with the pharmacies and get them involved. A lot of times now the pharmacists are aware of AlphaGal, but there still isn't a cross-reference in their system to tell them if your medicines contain mammal products. Next slide. And I was going to turn it over to Beth, and she's going to go more over the concerns regarding patients.
Hi, everybody. Thank you. Yes. So Tina, great job on all of that. Thank you. So when I was asked to participate in the tick-borne disease working group, which is the federal advisory committee that Jennifer had mentioned earlier, the committee is responsible for looking for gaps and overlaps in research related to conditions stemming from ticks. And so one of the things that Jennifer and I did was we sent out a survey to the AlphaGal folks, and what came back was not really surprising. Immediate top number one concern is lack of healthcare provider knowledge. Secondly would be ingredient labeling on food and pharmaceuticals. And then lastly, funding for additional research of AlphaGal. And this information can be supported if you go onto the Tick-borne disease working group website and look at all the written commentaries from people just like Dr. Merritt and myself that have AlphaGal that have written in, and many, many, many others in the AlphaGal community that wrote in that expressing exactly what these 3 bullet points represent. Can you go to the next slide? So with regards to, how to navigate AlphaGal or the day in the life of an AlphaGal, it's really well known that labeling is just absent out there, right? We don't have an AlphaGal free label on any products, whether it's packaged foods or pharmaceuticals, medications, whether they're over-the-counter prescription or vaccinations. No labeling on products that we might use on our bodies, or that, as I say, things that go in, on, and around us in everyday life. And that makes this really a challenging allergy, as most of the folks with AlphaGal quickly learn. But what's important to highlight regarding AlphaGal is that everybody reacts differently to the different mammalian meats and differently at different times. And the reason for that is really not well known. One of the things we do know is food allergies really don't have a muscle memory. And so you can get more information on the FAIR website. They have great resources on learning about the signs and symptoms of AlphaGal and in allergic reactions and what to do. So I strongly recommend everybody spend some time on the FAIR website and take a look at that and get educated, because knowing how to have, part of what's great about the FAIR website, I think, is that they have a lot of resources on how to have conversations with other people and how to get involved. And one of the things that you can get involved in too would be the FASTER Act, and there's information detailing what that FASTER Act is all about on the FAIR website. And in the bottom of this presentation, a lot of the resources that we're mentioning, the website links will be included at the end of the presentation. But the FASTER Act talks about having next allergens more readily available to get that labeling under this Food Allergy Labeling and Consumer Protection Act. So you may have heard that sesame is one of the newest categories of allergy that's affecting many people, and so that might be next coming up. And then this act kind of lays the groundwork. So I would strongly recommend going onto that FAIR website, getting familiar with all the different things that you can learn there. But that FASTER Act provides you with information so that you can dial into the legislators. Letters are already crafted for you and whatnot, and you can edit a little bit, so you can add a little something about AlphaGal. So it's just another way of getting involved. So in the meantime, we don't have these great resources out here. Our physicians and healthcare providers are just not trained and aware of AlphaGal and then how it affects and ripples through all the everyday items. So learning how to better advocate for yourself or your loved one is really important. So if you can go to the next slide. These 3 questions are the most basic, simple questions to help you every day. So at the top of the slide, you can see, if you have an Android or an Apple, you can ask, hey Google or hey Siri. And oops, there's my phone and my computer. And just ask how, such and such is made, and is this vegan, and does this contain animal? And you can see some of the examples of responses that I got asking those questions here on this slide. My caution to you is really be careful of the websites that you're looking at. We all learned that very early on the internet can be a great place, but it also can be a scary place. There's definitely some misinformation out there, intended or not intended. So just be aware. regardless of the information that you come up with, it is really important to take that to your healthcare provider so that he or she grows alongside with you until recommendations or standard treatments and education is provided to the healthcare network at large and or manufacturers. This is the best we have right now. So I would suggest getting familiar with these 3 phrases and get comfortable reading some of the many responses. From there, you might have to call, you would, want to call the manufacturers and ask them how that key ingredient is made. So before you can really start doing that, you have to understand what is a mammal, right? So a mammal is a warm-blooded, live birth vertebrate animal with hair. So in the United States, at least, some of the common foods or meats that we would eat that fit that definition would be beef, bison or buffalo, which a lot of folks when I lived in the Midwest used or ate, goat, lamb, rabbit, pork, venison, deer. And those items, whether it's the meat, the fat, or their bones, will be used for many food sources, but also products, which we'll get into in an upcoming slide. But so when you're out and about eating out at a restaurant, or you're eating at a friend's house, or at a holiday party or an outing, traveling, things like that, you really, if you have a good understanding what mammal is, you can have that conversation with the person in control of your food. So you want to ask about any broths or stocks, sauces, gravies, marinades, fats, lards. Natural flavorings can be tricky as well. A lot of times when you call the manufacturers looking for verification if a natural flavoring is mammalian-derived or not, they're not always able to give you that information because of proprietary blends. So unfortunately, that leaves us with the choice of just not drinking or eating the product with the natural flavorings. Dairy, non-dairy. So even if something says non-dairy, like some of the creamers will say non-dairy creamer, but there is some milk-based product in there. And as Dr. Merritt said, in her experience, about 50% of the patients with AlphaGal do test positive and or are reactive to milk products. So it's important to know about that as well. And then alcohol is an item that surprises a lot of new members to the support groups, is that some of the alcohol does, there's mammalian derived ingredients in there, whether it's through the filtering process or some gelatin and things like that. So if you could go to the next slide. Also, gelatin made from the hooves of mammals may find their way into some areas that you might not necessarily think of right off the top. So things like peanuts. That one was a surprise to me and a lot of us. And we found out after calling one key manufacturer that they actually use gelatin on their peanuts to help the seasonings stick, the salt in the seasonings. So be aware of that. Gummy candies, multivitamins, gelatin-based desserts, marshmallows, Altoids. I was so disappointed when I first learned about Altoids, but it certainly explained a lot why I was having reactions midday as I would take one of the breath mints. And then you can read the rest here, different candies as well. So if you could go to the next slide. And gelatin also can be found in some medications, so be aware of that. Also in some of the IV fluids is like a little filler, which can be found in some of the literature and studies. Now, with regards to other products, things that you wouldn't eat, this is where things get really tricky because, we're thinking of a food allergy, but that food item ends up in many products because we use the animals up so well. So things like lanolin can find their way into lipsticks, nursing ointments, and lotions. That's always a surprise with lipstick. Clothing, wool, cashmere, alpaca, leather, suede, that might cause some folks some difficulties. And oftentimes in the winter or the fall, when patients are putting on their sweaters and scarves and mittens and hats and things of that nature that were bitten and diagnosed over the summer, this one comes as a great big surprise. So it's important to keep this in mind as new people come in diagnosed to healthcare providers or those supporting folks with AlphaGal syndrome. Animals is a surprising one for many as well. So whether it's your pet or your livestock, AlphaGal can be found in the dander of pets as well as their manure and also their feed. So if their feed is mammalian-derived, that can cause some folks problems just being around it, touching it, or it being topical. So like little puppies next door were fed some raw meat, and whenever they would, come over and say hello, greet me at the end of the day, it would cause my skin to blister up when they would, sniff and touch my skin. So be aware of those things. And again, not everybody reacts the same, and we don't react the same all the time. So just be aware of that. This might be a tripping point. All of these items that we're discussing, they do not necessarily mean that everybody with AlphaGal will have these difficulties, but just be aware that it's something that might pose a problem for you while you're really sensitive and needing to calm your system down. Dr. Merritt mentioned stearic acid and magnesium stearate finding their way into medications, and body care and personal care items such as lotions, soaps, detergents, deodorants, cosmetics, and even cosmetic brushes are animal derived. They're not always synthetic. You may find them in some other personal products as well, such as personal lubricants or sanitary napkins or things of that nature. So just be aware. You really want to take a new set of eyes every time you replenish your products. Even if you find a brand that works really well, you want to look at those ingredients every time. Same goes for medications, because you never know when the ingredient changes or the supplier of that particular ingredient may change. One item that is not mammal that is an exception to AlphaGal is carrageenan, and that is an emulsifier that you will find in a lot of dairy products, like that would be labeled vegan even, such as almond milk or coconut milk, or it might be in cosmetics like lotions, skincare, foundations, lipsticks, eyeliners, things of that nature. And that is a surprise, because it's actually a red algae, but the way it's made, your body recognizes it as pork. So be aware of that the vegan label is not always 100% safe, at least for those of us that are additionally sensitive to carrageenan. Dr. Merritt touched upon vaccinations. This is not to steer anybody away from vaccinations or towards it. It's just to be aware that if you are on the more sensitive scale, that this may be a more serious concern for you. But there are many different ingredient names found within the vaccinations recommended by the CDC. And some things are pretty obvious what the name would be, like bovine or pig, canine, calf. But this, one of the bullets I want to bring your attention to, Cocker Spaniel, that's, they'll be listed as words like maiden, Derby, canine kidney. Now, canine you might pick up, but if it's just MD kidney or something like that, you might not understand immediately that that's mammal. likewise, for something like Fenton medium or Mueller's medium, those are terms used in the CDC ingredient list for the vaccinations. And, you know, the medical folks that you're seeing are not necessarily trained to know immediately that those are mammal-derived items, nor would the manufacturer when you call the the helpline. So it takes patience and knowing how to go back through information that you've learned, like here today, and using your phone to and the internet to identify how particular ingredients are made. It doesn't mean that you can't get those vaccinations. There are steroid treatments that you can take in advancement or during an event of an emergency, and you just want to work with your healthcare provider. Now, if you do have a reaction, right now, one thing that we can help move the needle on the request and need for labeling of any of the products, whether it's under FDA, USDA, or the alcohol and tobacco agencies, is to report a reaction. And so this website here, you can at the FDA, you can go in and report an adverse reaction or serious allergic reaction to any of the ingredients or items that we just talked about. So if you feel so empowered, anytime you have a reaction, click on that link and send them a note. So if you can go to the next slide, please. So when you're diagnosed with AlphaGal, it is a real game changer. I think most of us would agree. Learning how to navigate everyday life, whether you're a student or a working adult or somebody that just likes to go out, anywhere we go, it can be a cause for an allergic reaction, potentially for some of us, where it might be airborne at a restaurant. You might avoid breakfasts and diners and things like that. It really can upset someone's life. So growing together with your healthcare provider and really having those candid conversations is so important. So whether you're the healthcare provider or the patient, you want to work together towards learning how to best navigate this, because sometimes opportunistic conditions can creep in, and sometimes we tend to put on blinders and think it's all AlphaGal related, or it's not at all AlphaGal related. It can go either way. So working together is important. But you can also get some resource and support through TBC United, the Food Allergy Resource Education, or FAIR, which we're here today with. There's many different AlphaGal support groups and food allergy support groups on the social media sites and websites. So whether it's specific that you're Googling for AlphaGal or mammal meat allergy or food allergy or even tick-borne diseases, these are great resources to dial into as well. If you can go to the next slide. And so, the thing that we want to leave you with, we'll leave you with these resources, but really want to empower each of you to become your own advocate, whether it's for yourself or your loved one or your patient. Knowing how to go about and continue your everyday life it's a challenge with AlphaGal, but it's not impossible. So let us support you and call upon those around you for help. You will get through this. You just be empowered to learn how to become your own detective and your own advocate. It's going to take some patience, but I promise you'll get through it. And so some of the resources, the FAIR, the Food Allergy, the Protection Act, and the FASTER Act that I had mentioned, you can go through. Again, next slide. And the Tick-borne disease working group I had mentioned, there's an upcoming meeting in January where we'll be presenting the draft report that will go to Congress for approval of our recommendations for all of the subcommittees, whether it's Lyme disease or AlphaGal syndrome or any of the other subcommittees on the tick-borne disease working group. So I would encourage you all to go to this website, take a look, sign in. You can write in as well. So if you or a loved one or if you're a healthcare provider, please write in and share your concerns and your stories, because we are incorporating a lot of the commentaries and the concerns into the report that ultimately makes it to Congress. And we're learning a lot. So please continue to write in. The CDC ingredient list is next. And then, of course, we would be remiss if we didn't leave you with some information about ticks in the United States. So you want to look at the CDC website and get some information there, or again at tbcunited.org related to ticks and the diseases and how to prevent the conditions in the first place. So now I'll pass it back to Jennifer. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much. Dr. Your information has been really. Are you all hearing an echo, or is that just me?
I think you're good now, Jennifer.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to leave you with a quick couple of more pieces of information. As we mentioned earlier, we are doing research. Surveys are a very important part of our research, and we had a phenomenal feedback when we solicited input from AlphaGal syndrome patients for the federal tick-borne disease working group report. And we are finishing up a pilot survey now. If you'll go to the survey page, if you're interested in participating, we've got a survey coming up within the next few days on AlphaGal syndrome patient symptoms and food preferences. And then in January, we're starting a Wednesday webinar series that we will be doing roughly every couple of weeks, talking about protection, and then we'll be doing a restaurant training as well for restaurant workers, how they can educate themselves on being prepared for patrons that have AlphaGal syndrome. And then we'll talk about wellness, and those are especially the two keys for support that are needed are nutrition and emotional support, and then also schools and employment. So if you'll go to the website, our TBC website as well, you can register or pre-register for those webinars that we'll have coming up. And just a quick final thought before we go to questions and answers. I was on the phone last night talking to a woman from Canada whose grandson had tested positive for the proteins, and so I had to inform her that yes, that did indicate that he was highly likely to have AlphaGal syndrome, but that knowledge is power. And like Beth was saying, we have, it is a game changer, but with knowledge, you have a lot of power in being able to navigate this syndrome and to have a healthy life and be able to really be, hopeful about how you're dealing with it and going forward. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Carrie, and I believe you have some of the questions that have been coming up.
I do. Thank you so much. Thank you all three. It's so interesting for me. I'm learning a lot even just from sitting in on this webinar, and it's such an important topic. I'm so glad we can host you all. And on the topic of questions, we did get so many that came in, which is great because everyone's very engaged, and you all were able to answer quite a few along the way, which is always helpful. But I'd love to take the next 10 minutes and ask maybe some of the more popular ones or ones that were asked by multiple people. So I will kick things off and kind of go back to the topic of ticks. And a few of our attendees, this is a three-part question, but someone asked, are ticks the only way to develop this? And along those lines, how soon after a tick bite occurs would perhaps the allergy or some of the symptoms develop? And then lastly, how soon could you be tested accurately if you indeed, perhaps did have AlphaGal? Now, I'll pass that off to the group.
I would like to answer that one. As Jennifer mentioned early on, I also have this allergy. So a lot of my point of reference has to do with my own experience. But I have observed, I have about 500 patients with AlphaGal allergy. I've observed that if they didn't have symptoms before they had this tick bite, it takes about 2 months to develop symptoms after the tick bite. If they've had this allergy before, it takes about 2 weeks. So I was negative for several years and got bitten by a tick 2 years ago, and my IgE to AlphaGal went from 0 to 15 in 2 weeks. And so it can be that quick if you've had symptoms before. And then I think someone was saying that their daughter was negative but had symptoms. There's 4 ways to have an allergic reaction. We generally only test for one. But if someone has a clear history of symptoms, then they should avoid it, even if the test was negative.
Great, thank you. I just kind of, go ahead and chime in if you want to.
No, I just said that's a great question, and it's definitely, it's something that has been discussed, as an area of education that needs to be better communicated, is knowing how to test, when to test, and interpret the test results. And also to understand, are ticks really the only way you.
And to that end, this is Jennifer, I will add that there is some contemplation that chiggers may also be associated with AlphaGal syndrome, and we've never yet tested the saliva of chiggers to confirm that AlphaGal is present in their saliva, like we know that it is present in the saliva of several other ticks. So when people see these multiple bites on their legs or wherever that they think are chigger bites, they may in fact sometimes be the larval Lone Star ticks. So really the verdict is still out on the question, are ticks the only way?
That's so funny because that was the next question I was about to ask. So thank you for answering that for me. So unfortunately, we don't have an answer for that, but I'll move on to another attendee's question. This was, if someone has only had mild reactions and then eliminates meat, is there a higher likelihood of anaphylaxis or a more severe reaction from a future, say, accidental exposure?
No, generally speaking, the only treatment for food allergy is to avoid it. And we think with some allergies, you get desensitized over time by avoiding it. Dr. Platt-Mills used to say that people with AlphaGal allergy could possibly lose this allergy after avoidance for 3 to 5 years. But now he says it goes into remission, which I believe he says that because if you get bitten again, this allergy goes up. So theoretically, if someone was avoiding these things, they could become less reactive over time as long as they don't get bitten again.
And I will just add on to that, the problem with a lot of this is we just don't have good data. And that's one of the reasons that the report to the Tick-borne disease working group that the AlphaGal syndrome subcommittee has put together is so important, because it's going to help pave the way for future funding, we hope. And the Kay-Hagan Tick Act is currently before the Senate. It is scheduled for about any day now, and then it'll go to the House. And that Tick Act, as it stands now, would fund up to $100 million in research and education to answer some of these very questions that we're talking about today, and it's really critical.
Wonderful, thank you. One of our attendees asked, would things labeled vegan or kosher parva be recommended for someone with AlphaGal?
I can answer that. So yes, in general, but people that can eat chicken and fish with this allergy, sometimes, you know, we can have something that's vegan but throw chicken on it. And a lot of times in restaurants, they don't understand that. So it's hard to go and say you're vegan, but you're really not because you can eat chicken. But when you're using products, yes, parv is usually related to religious reasons for not having beef or pork. And those products we would assume would be vegan.
And I might add that poultry can sometimes be tricky. As we found out at Thanksgiving, you need to look at the ingredients that have been injected into the turkey for flavoring. It might be sometimes that they're injected with gelatin to fluff them up, or natural flavorings that include mammal ingredients. So poultry, while generally safe, can be a little bit dicey sometimes.
Thank you.
I know from personal experience, a dear friend cooked supper for me, and the boneless, skinless, unmarinated chicken from the meat counter thought for sure it would be safe. And I ended up having an allergic reaction, and it ended up being that there were some things inserted into that chicken, like the natural flavorings, but also it did have, it's been so long, I can't remember if it was beef or pork flavoring, but it was, you know, added into it along with sugar, which was surprising. And sugar can be processed through bone char, which would be primarily mammal derived. So some people are with AlphaGal are sensitive to that level as well. So, you know, it could have been any one of those three things that was inserted into the boneless, skinless, unmarinated raw chicken out of the meat counter. So you really want to be careful and learn to be that ingredient detective.
The best option if you're going to eat fish or chicken, or especially the poultry items, is, if you can, to go with a local producer so you can personally talk to them to see how they've grown their poultry and how it's been processed.
Yeah, great.
Thank you. Thank you all. This one came up, and I'm going to ask because I don't know what this treatment is, so I will get informed as well. But someone was asking if there are any treatments available other than SAAT, and forgive me because I don't know what that acronym is. So hopefully one of y'all can help answer that.
So that has to do with a procedure that involves acupuncture, and since I'm not in that area and it's not in a scientifically, you know, manner, I don't really want to comment on that one.
Okay, no problem. Thank you.
Well, can you answer if there are other treatments outside of the acupuncture?
Currently, for AlphaGal, there are not treatments for it. It's avoidance. Other food allergies, such as peanut, they're doing an oral desensitization and a patch desensitization. There's also some clinical trials with food allergies and using Xolair, which is a shot that was intended for asthma and urticaria. And so they're doing that for people with multiple food allergies. They're doing a Xolair study right now. Other than that, I'm not quite sure of like any formal clinical trials.
Okay, thank you. And it looks like maybe we have time for one more question, and I'm thinking this might be up your alley, Beth, but we had an attendee ask, do you have any advice for someone whose insurance is refusing to pay for a meat-free medication because it's just more expensive? Is there any advocacy that can be done?
I mean, my best advice is based on my experience with that personally over the years, multiple times. It's kind of a constant thing that I have to do. But my healthcare provider actually helped by making phone calls to my insurance company with me in the office to figure out a way to get compounded medications passed, because we quickly learned that, you know, it was costing over $1,000 out of my pocket just to get treated for Lyme disease, which I also contracted. And the standard medication had mammal in it. And it was too much of a burden. So my physician helped step in. And from that point on, there's been a little bit of touch and go. Sometimes compounded medications get approved and sometimes they don't. Thankfully, I don't have to walk that path too often. I'm pretty healthy for the most part. But that's my best advice, is to ask your healthcare provider to assist with that, because as Dr. Merritt had indicated, that in some cases you might need to flag it as allergic urticaria. Is that the correct terminology, Dr. Merritt?
Yes, that usually gets the test paid for. As far as the medicines go, I've had a difficult time getting insurances to pay for the compounded medicines. I've written letters of medical necessity, also when we need brand necessary. So if we know the name brand of a medicine doesn't contain mammal, but we're not so sure about the generic, I've written letters of medical necessity, and those usually do get paid for if we have the good reason that they're allergic to the generic components.
It's an excellent question, because right now it's a challenge. It's a case by case, and every time you never know when the insurance might kick it back as denied. And just because it's denied doesn't mean that's the end of the story. I would absolutely call back again, because I've done that, and 3 attempts ended up with my medication approved. So just keep fighting.
And I will add one more thing real quick. There's a new nonprofit out there called Medical Bill Gurus, and they were formed to help people with tick-borne disease get their insurance premiums, insurance coverages paid. So people might want to check that out as a potential resource. It's Medical Bill Gurus.
Wonderful. Thank you all. With that, I am going to just lastly echo what Jennifer was saying and the importance of surveys and data, really helping every allergy out there, especially AlphaGal, and then, at FAIR with all of our food allergies as well. So I just want to, let everyone know that we have a patient registry, and in it, nearly 400 people have reported that they have an allergy to red or mammalian meat. And, it's so important for you to share your AlphaGal story with researchers, so we get more dollars, so we have better labeling, so we can, kind of move everyone forward. And FAIR has a patient registry. The link is right here. All of your stories are unique, and the more that the more people who join and contribute, to the surveys, that Jennifer was talking about, and to the patient registry, the better that the data will be for researchers who are seeking to develop new treatments and improve patient care, for everyone. So please take a minute to visit the link over at the tbcunited.org site, as well as our food allergy patient registry site. And with that, I will just say a huge thank you to our 3 experts today who have provided such valuable and interesting information. We really appreciate it. And to all of our attendees who came, thank you so much for being so engaged. If we weren't able to answer your question, I can back up a couple slides. You can email at info@tbcunited.org. And this webinar has been recorded, and just give us a couple weeks and it'll be up on our website, and you'll be able to listen to it. So thanks again for joining us, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Stay safe, everybody.